In the spring of 2015, a team of archaeologists dug into an abandoned olive grove in southern Greece, expecting almost nothing. They'd been denied permission to excavate their first choice site. This overgrown field was their backup plan. 10 days in, their shovels struck a thick layer of bronze. And what they uncovered next would rewrite what historians thought they knew about the birth of Western civilization. Today, we're stepping into the tomb of a man who has come to be known as the Griffin Warrior, a Bronze Age burial so untouched, so loaded with treasure, that experts still call it one of the most important archaeological finds in Greece in more than 50 years. Who was he? Why was a man from mainland Greece buried with objects that seemed to belong to an entirely different civilization? And what did archaeologists find at the bottom of his grave that took years just to properly see? To understand why this discovery mattered so much, you need to picture Greece around 1450 BC. At this time, two great cultures dominated the Aegean world. On the island of Crete, the Minoans had built palaces, developed writing, and created some of the most sophisticated art of the ancient Mediterranean. On the mainland Greek mainland, a newer, rising power was emerging, the Mycenaeans, the same people later immortalized in Homer's stories of Agamemnon and the Trojan War. Historians have long debated exactly how these two worlds connected. Did the mainland Mycenaeans conquer Crete, trade with it, absorb its culture peacefully? The tomb hidden in that olive grove near the ancient city of Pylos was about to offer some of the clearest evidence yet. The excavation was led by husband and wife archaeologists Jack Davis and Sharon Stocker of the University of Cincinnati, working near the site known as the Palace of Nestor, a Mycenaean palace complex famous in Greek legend as the home of King Agamemnon from Homer's epics. As the team dug into the field, they began to see the corner of a large stone structure. Then came the bronze. Then came something almost unheard of in Greek archaeology, an intact grave. Most Bronze Age tombs in the region had been plundered centuries, even millennia ago. This one hadn't been touched since the day it was sealed. Inside a stone-lined shaft, the team found a wooden coffin, long since decayed, containing the skeleton of a man between 30 and 35 years old. Around him lay an almost unbelievable wealth of objects: bronze weapons, gold and silver cups, ivory combs, beads of amber and carnelian, and a bronze basin resting on his chest. Archaeologists eventually cataloged more than 400 beads and roughly 50 stone seals in that grave alone. They nicknamed him the Griffin Warrior, after an ivory plaque found among his belongings carved with the image of a griffin, a mythical creature that was part lion, part eagle. But here's where the story takes its first real turn. As researchers studied the artifacts more closely, they noticed something strange. Many of the objects buried with this Mycenaean man weren't Mycenaean at all. They were Minoan, crafted in the artistic style of Crete, an island more than 100 miles away. Gold rings engraved with Minoan ritual scenes, seal stones carved with imagery straight out of Cretan religious tradition. Why would a mainland warrior, buried in a mainland tomb, be surrounded by treasures from a completely different culture? The leading explanation, supported by decades of research into this period, is that Minoan art and luxury goods were prized status symbols on the mainland even before the Mycenaeans built their famous palaces. Elite mainland families seem to have acquired, commissioned, or been gifted Minoan objects as a way of displaying wealth and connection to the more advanced civilization of Crete. In other words, this warrior wasn't just wealthy, he was plugged into a network of trade, diplomacy, or cultural exchange that stretched across the Aegean Sea at a moment when the mainland was just beginning to rise into the powerful palace-building society we know as Mycenaean Greece. As the excavation continued through the summer and into the fall of 2015, the sheer scale of the burial kept growing. What began as a promising find turned into one of the richest single graves ever recovered on the Greek mainland. By the time the initial 6-month excavation wrapped up, the team had removed roughly 1,400 individual objects. Weapons lay along one side of his body, a bronze sword more than 3 feet long, its hilt wrapped in gold and ivory, alongside a dagger with a gold-covered handle. On his other side were personal items: combs, a bronze mirror, jewelry. It looked, researchers said, like a deliberate arrangement, a warrior's identity laid out for eternity. Weapons on one side, wealth and status on the other. And then came a twist that would take years to fully reveal itself. Buried in a mass of calcified material near the warrior's chest was a small object that at first glance didn't look like much at all. It was encrusted, corroded, barely recognizable. Conservators spent more than a year painstakingly cleaning it under magnification, removing limestone deposits millimeter by millimeter. What emerged stunned even seasoned archaeologists: a tiny agate seal stone, just over an inch long, carved with a battle scene of such extraordinary detail that some experts believe it may be the finest example of miniature art ever recovered from the Bronze Age Aegean. This object became known as the Pylos combat agate. On its surface, two warriors clash in mortal combat, while a third lies dead at their feet. Every muscle, every weapon, every fold of clothing rendered with a precision that seems almost impossible given the stone's tiny size. Archaeology magazine would later call it a Bronze Age masterpiece. What makes it even more remarkable is that some of the details on the seal are so fine they're barely visible to the naked eye, suggesting the Minoan artist who carved it may have used some form of magnifying tool or possessed an extraordinary level of skill that historians are still trying to fully explain. It raised a genuinely open question: how advanced was craftsmanship in the Bronze Age Aegean, and how did artists achieve this level of precision without the technology we associate with fine detail work today? If the seal stone reshaped how historians thought about Minoan artistry, the next discovery reshaped how they understood the warrior's role in society. Among the grave goods were 4 gold signet rings, each engraved with elaborate Minoan ritual scenes, processions, altars, figures associated with religious ceremony. Signet rings like these weren't just decorative. In the Minoan and early Mycenaean world, they functioned as symbols of authority, used to seal documents and mark ownership, much like a signature does today. A man buried with 4 of them, alongside weapons of war and treasure from a foreign land, wasn't simply a soldier. The evidence increasingly pointed to someone who held military, religious, and political power all at once, a leader whose influence touched multiple spheres of early Mycenaean society. That conclusion connects directly to the biggest question this entire discovery was built around. What does the Griffin warrior's tomb actually tell us about the relationship between Crete and mainland Greece? For decades, one theory held that the Minoans essentially colonized or heavily dominated the early mainland culturally, exporting their art, religion, and customs before the balance of power eventually shifted and the Mycenaeans became the dominant force in the Aegean. The Griffin warrior's burial, dated to a critical transitional window around 1450 BC, offers a rare physical snapshot of exactly that shift in progress. This wasn't a Minoan buried on the mainland. It was a mainland leader embracing and displaying Minoan culture as a marker of sophistication and power, right before the Mycenaeans would go on to build their own massive palaces, develop their own writing system, and eventually eclipse Crete entirely as the dominant Bronze Age civilization in Greece. That's the story this tomb tells when you connect every piece of evidence together. The weapons show a warrior. The signet rings show a leader with religious and political authority. The Minoan luxury goods show a mainland elite actively absorbing the artistic language of a more advanced neighboring civilization. And the exquisite seal stone shows a level of craftsmanship that challenges assumptions about what Bronze Age artists were capable of. Individually, each object is remarkable. Together, they capture a precise historical moment, the hinge point where one civilization's influence was giving way to the rise of another. The discovery didn't stop with this single grave either. A few years later, in 2017, the same team uncovered 2 additional beehive-shaped tombs nearby, containing further evidence connected to the same family or community, deepening researchers' understanding of the site. Since the initial excavation, the total number of artifacts recovered from the area has grown to include thousands of items, and scholarship on the find continues to this day. What makes the Griffin warrior's tomb so significant isn't just the gold or the weapons, or even the breathtaking artistry of that tiny tiny combat scene carved into stone. It's what the burial reveals about a hinge point in history, a moment when one of Europe's earliest civilizations was still finding its identity, borrowing, adapting, and ultimately building something new from the culture that came before it. For over 3,000 years, that story sat sealed beneath an olive grove, waiting for a team of archaeologists who almost dug somewhere else entirely. Sometimes the most important discoveries in human history are found not where we expect them, but exactly where the past was patient enough to wait.